Well, we are starting our material for week 7. You have officially gotten through the most intensive portion of the semester. You've gotten through the quantitative and qualitative research. And now we are going to move into talking about reporting and evaluating, and then the different styles of designs that you can go through for the rest of the semester. So, way to hang in there. It's a lot. Week 5 and 6 are just a lot. So, today we are starting on reporting and evaluating research. And what I love about this class is that we really do kind of an overview of everything that you're going to cover for the rest of your projects or theses here at Chico State. And so, we're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty of now that we've done the project, we've implemented the project. How do we report it? What is our goal in a master's program? And so I'm going to share a little bit of my journey with you today, kind of from the start of my experience in the master's program all the way to graduation day, just to kind of give you a quick little overview of what this process looked like in my own story. So when I started my research career here at Chico State, I started with little things. I was doing dairy research with Dr. Cindy Daly. I was doing feed research with Dr. Casey Diatley. And you can see those were not the cleanest research projects of my life. And so that undergraduate experience is really what moved me into graduate level research. And I started doing presentations all across the country with Dr. Casey Diatley. A lot of those projects were pieces or portions of either projects I was working on at the farm or my actual graduate research that I was working on. And then finally, after 2 years of just deep investment, I did my actual thesis defense. And so I was so excited to have that process done, and so excited when I got to be like, my process is done and I get to graduate and no more of this trying to work and do research at the same time. So, anyway, I just want to give you a little bit of hope because as you're starting this process, sometimes it can feel really overwhelming. This class is very heavy with material, and it's really just giving you an overview of every piece that you're going to tackle over the next 2 years. So, if it's feeling a little overwhelming, don't worry. You're going to come back to a lot of these concepts over and over again during your time here at Chico State with us. Let's start today by defining what a research report is. So, a research report would be defined as anything that is a completed study, meaning I have done everything from the design of that study, the purpose, the question, the hypothesis, all the way to data collection and analysis. And it's going to report on that either investigation or exploration and actually include that whole 6 steps, right, of the research process, and then interpretations by the researcher that they are then ready to either publish or present in some type of professional setting. Now, for those that are in a master's program, we're going to have just some different standards than those that have either already graduated or are working in the professional realm. Ours are going to be honestly a little more specific. So we'll kind of talk about the audiences we would need to see in your experience as a master's student. So audiences, we want to make sure we understand, are we speaking to faculty? Are these advisors or committee members? Am I actually headed into a thesis, defense? Am I trying to get my research submitted into a journal? Am I trying to get it in front of policymakers, right? Am I trying to get in front of congressmen, Senate, maybe state assembly? And am I trying to maybe not do any of those things? I just really want information that I can then hand to educators that are currently in the classroom for some type of benefit for them. Am I headed to a conference? Am I presenting at the conference? Am I doing a poster session? And then also, as the researcher, what are my opinions and how am I interpreting this so that it makes sense? And so we just want to make sure that as we are, getting ready to present data, working through, research with humans, that we are following the standards of the audience we're speaking to, and then we're making sure that everything we speak is accounting for things like accuracy, diversity of student, and equity, because each one of us is going to be teaching in a different demographic, in a different program, or maybe we're at a specific conference. And so just understanding who we're trying to share this information with so that we can tailor it. Because one of the things you're going to observe is that you may have a lot of information that you're ready to give people, but we need to make sure that it's given to them in a way that's most palatable for their role or their, experience level. So the faculty audience are really going to be usually tied to your program or your collegiate experience. So it's going to be, for College of Agriculture, that would be someone like Dr. Molly Aschenbrenner. And it's the faculty standards. Molly really cares about research. She really cares about research design. She's worried about grammar. So she's going to have some standards she expects you to measure up to. Then we're going to have program standards, right? I'm picking a project, I'm picking a thesis. This is what I'm spending all of my life doing right now, right? Is that writing process based off of what the program's asked from me. And then also understanding here's, I have to have a project or a thesis done to meet that college Masters of Agriculture Education standard as well. So a lot of the faculty audience is going to be based around what you're doing in your program at your university. Then we move into journal reviewers, and some of you may take research and push it into a journal eventually, especially if you're working out in industry. That happens pretty regularly, or if you're working through, extension services. And there are some students that take their either thesis or dissertation material and push a journal out of it as well. So those journal reviewers are going to be based off of the actual journal you're trying to get into. So one of the big ones I've always gone after is the, Association of Animal Science, ASAS, or NACDA, which is the National Agriculture Teachers one. And so there's different places that we've submitted journals, and they have very, very specific formatting, very specific ways they want you to be writing things that were very different than the standards I was held to for the actual publishing of that thesis writing. Another one you're going to see is oftentimes in universities, we're trying so hard to run all of this research. And we know that technical language, we know the ins and outs of the project. But then when we go to speak to someone that's not from our industry or someone that we need their help when it comes to government legislation, they may look at our project and go, I don't understand half of what this means. Can you please help me? And so we really, especially with policymakers and educators who don't have experience in advanced education, we don't want to stay up in that theoretical world, right? Where we are the only ones that understand this. We're the only ones that get the data. And so half of our job, right, in higher education is to take all of that theoretical information, framework, specific industry language, and bring it down to someone who maybe doesn't have that level of experience. They're focused on other things, but we need them to get why this study is so important and understand the results. So policymakers and practicing educators are really the kind of two that I would say, we really need to not, I hate the phrase dumb it down, because that's not what it is. What it is it's a translation. I'm taking all of this really cool data that I understand and I'm translating it so that you know what this means and then what are some actionable items I can have from this 2 years of my life, right? And so while there are many faculty on staff here at Chico State that don't know the ins and out of the data we pulled from my actual thesis project, they do know that the application was, hey, we need a new introduction class to the animal science majors, because even though they think they know this material when they come into our program, they actually don't know this material. And we have a huge knowledge gap that's happening here, and it's causing complications in lab classrooms. And then we move into conferences, and conferences are kind of their own little thing. They're going to release their standards, every year for that conference. They're going to let you know what they're expecting for presentations, what they're expecting for posters, what they're expecting for abstracts, or, different question and answer seminars that they might handle, or if they want you to be an actual, session speaker or run a little, workshop. And so a lot of those are going to be tailored to that specific entity and what they're asking for. And then last but not least is just understanding as the researcher that I have, I've addressed all of this material for the sixth part of the research process. I understand what I'm trying to do. Am I trying to take it to a journal? Am I trying to take it to my thesis committee? Am I trying to take it to a conference? And then understanding that because I have qualitative or quantitative studies, where is going to be a good fit for me to share this information? And then how do I, as a researcher, translate all of this knowledge that I have to a person that doesn't have experience with my topic? So now that we understand audience, there are 4 types of research reports that you may experience throughout your professional career. The big one you're going to be focusing on right now is either a project or a thesis. If you head into a PhD program, you'll move into a dissertation. The length and the style of these tends to depend on the program and the institution. And oftentimes, qualitative studies are even longer than quantitative studies because we have so many quotes and information that needs to be, pushed forward from the individuals that participated in the study. And they're often defended before some type of committee, two or three different professors that say, yes, this person has done the research, they're ready to graduate. Second one is going to be a journal article. A lot of you that are out in industry are probably pretty familiar with this, and we're going to get a lot of exposure to more and more journal articles the longer you're here with us at Chico State. Getting research published in a journal is a very, very cool accomplishment in your professional career, and it's fun to get to see students do that, year after year in different topics and different articles and different journals. And then the next one is going to be some type of conference, either a paper or a proposal. This could be, I did a presentation, I submitted a paper, I'm doing a professional conference, I'm doing an academic conference, I'm doing a policy conference. There are so many different ways that you're going to see that happen. The lengths and the standards are going to change based off of what that industry is looking for. And generally, if you're, a keynote speaker or a, workshop speaker, you're going to have usually 10 to 20 minutes to get that material across to the audience. And then last but not least are reports. So these often happen where I take a actual research project and I translate it into some type of professional setting. Think I'm taking something from higher education to a stakeholder group. A big topic right now that you're going to see in California is livestock composting or wolf management, where we're running all these studies, we're getting all of this momentum, and then we're translating that in a report and trying to get policy built off of that. So that's going to be oftentimes where we're going to see reports. You might also see academic settings where, hey, we have this one-page overview. Here's the highlights. Here's how it applies to our program. Thank you so much, administration team. This is why we care. And so that also is helpful for us to know that we really, again, have to tailor those reports to the audiences we're pursuing. So we're going to dig deeper into each of these types of reports and just get some basics at the table and things to kind of get on your radar to start paying attention to. So when we start tackling proposals, there's four big things that I want to address. I want to make sure that as I'm building this research proposal, and we do this for any style of research, even if we're not in a master's or a thesis process, but step one is going to be I need a plan. So I need to understand, what am I trying to do? Where am I trying to go? And I'm juggling, right? All of these pieces of, I've got to have research. I need to have permission from the research site. I need to figure out who are the administrative gatekeepers to keep me from that information. I need their permission. I might need parental permission. What are my criteria so that I know what I'm trying to tell them? And then as we start to put all these pieces together of schedules and research concepts and instruments, then I want to make sure that in this proposal, I am telling them, okay, in, the future, this is my goal. Whether it's quantitative, whether it's qualitative, whatever it might be, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. We always want to stop those proposals at the methods because we don't have data. We don't have analysis. We don't have conclusions. We just have a really good plan. And we want you to understand, okay, from this quantitative or qualitative proposal, here's where I'm going. Here's the theoretical framework I'm looking for. Or maybe here's this really incredible literature review that I've built to show you why we need to pursue this project and give you that really strong, yes, support me. And then what is the purpose? So how can I apply this, right, to groups of people, and how am I planning for, oh, this didn't work. Oh, hold on, I need to change some things, or oh, I don't have that permission. Okay, no worries. Let me switch that proposal so that this will fit your, scholastic environment or this classroom or this district. Now, when it comes to writing, we really don't do that till second semester, but what we like to do with these proposals is really give ourselves an overview of what we're trying to cover and what we think would go in each section. And then, maybe we're actually having to submit a formal proposal to our district or our program. And so we want you to have an overview of what should be in a quantitative versus a qualitative proposal if and when you have to submit something like that in this program. So on quantitative proposal formats, we want to start with a title page and an abstract and an introduction. And these are pretty standard and APA formatted materials. And again, we are working on a data heavy project for this, right? So we are going to have quantitative information. We're going after statistics. We're looking at data. but we don't have that data yet. And so the way we're going to build that proposal is we're going to go, okay, here's an abstract of the overview of what I'm trying to look at. Here's my introduction. And my introduction is going to be pretty beefy, right? I'm going to tell you what the problem is. I'm going to tell you what my research questions are. I'm going to tell you the theoretical perspective that I'm going from, right? Because I want my project to be just steeped in theory and why I care about this, even if it's maybe a topic we don't see a lot of research on yet. And then I want to tell you some terms that are really important that you're going to need to know, and then maybe some limitations or delimitations that I might see in this process. Then I'm going to give you a beefy literature review, right? I want to build up the reason and the why for this study and really sell it to you. Like, here's the amazing progression of how I got here and why you should support this and let me move through with this, or why this is going to be important for my field of study. And then we're going to move into methods. So you're going to pick a design style. You're going to tell me what your procedures are, maybe create an instrument, determine reliability and validity of that instrument, and then move into data analysis, get those results, and identify any ethical issues we might see popping up. And then, as any good proposal, we want to make sure we have a timeline of how this is going to happen, a budget of anything we might need, and then some type of preliminary chapter outline, like here's the topics I'm going to try to go through. And this shouldn't be, something that you're super stressed about yet in our program. It should be, hey, I understand that when I sit down to do this process, this is the flow I need to move through as a writer. And like we've previously discussed, qualitative are going to have some similarities when we come to writing up those proposals, but they're also going to have some pretty significant differences. So title page, abstract, the introduction are going to be pretty similar. We're going to see the introduction not be as intensive as the quantitative proposal, and we are missing that literature review. However, I am going to go in really great detail about my procedure. So what is my qualitative methodology and my design? How am I doing my research site and my purposeful sampling? I've got to defend that. And then how am I going to do data analysis when it comes to coding and pulling themes out of these interviews? And then what's my role? How could I possibly, mess with ethics while I'm in this research setting? And then how am I going to validate the information I'm pulling from this study? We want to kind of maybe offer some preliminary findings. Maybe I've already done some pilot study, or I have a, researcher's role in this, or thoughts about this, what the outcomes are going to be. And then you have the option of a literature review if it's going to help, really explore your central phenomenon, but you might not be there yet. And this might just be pure exploration, and we don't have a ton of information to go after that topic. And then again, just like quantitative, timeline, budget, and what your chapter outline is. And then maybe you've attached an instrument to that as well in that appendix. I also wanted to just attach some sample guidelines from the American Educational Research Association. Again, every conference or journal is going to have their own guidelines, but these are some great examples of what that institution requires. So when you go to put a proposal in, you have to have an objective and a purpose. You have to have a theoretical framework or perspective, show them the methods and modes of inquiry. Do you have data sources? Do you have objects or materials or evidence to build into that data story? And then can you show us results and conclusions with that scholarly, process of understanding why this work is important? And then they'll have even more in-depth, formatting guidelines as well. So again, you're going to have to go through and dig those out every single time you go to present something. And then as we move into research reports, we just want to again talk about this physical structure. Again, remember, this is that translation where I'm taking all of this information and I am boiling it down into a one-page report that I could share with a group of people, right? It could be a group of educators, a group of policymakers, whatever it might be. So the big things we want to pay attention to is that I've addressed, right, those 6 steps in the research process. I have them simply translated. Okay, we want to make sure we've got hypothesis. So talking through what my questions are and how we've answered those, and then identifying, okay, am I doing a scholastic report, a policy report? Is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? And we're going to go into those styles in just a second. And then understanding that I've got headings, right? I'm telling you specifically, here's every part of that process. Here's all the information under those headings. It is clear. It is concise. You do not have to work hard for this information. So we won't spend a ton of time on the quantitative report formats. It's just there if you need it. And so when we talk about the quantitative structure, we just want to make sure again that we have right understanding. We have some things that need to go in a specific order. And most of the literature reviews that you get out will follow a similar structure to what we're seeing. But again, it's that quantitative, it's data heavy. I'm taking all of this, research, journal articles, I'm condensing it down into a literature review, and then I'm moving through that methods, results, and discussion. And I'm probably going to have some type of formatting for references and anything additional in my appendices. So very straightforward. We've kind of already addressed a lot of this on the actual proposal structure, but this would be after the research is done and I'm going to publish that or present that. Qualitative reports are not going to follow the same scientific backbone that we just went through with the quantitative report structure. And so the closest one to quantitative in terms of style of report would be that scientific approach where we have as many of those examples, right, of the introduction, the review of literature, the methods, the results as possible, but it's still a qualitative project. The storytelling approach can have varied structures, so it's going to be a lot more persuasive and creative as it approaches the study. It might use things like plots or climaxes or metaphors, so it's going to be a little more narrative in kind of style. And then the thematic approaches are going to have, extensive discussions about themes that maybe arose as you were working through analyzing and coding the information from the interviews. And so sometimes qualitative projects will actually have extensively more writing because we're exploring all of the themes that we saw come out of the research process. And then the descriptive approach is going to really include like a very detailed description of people and places. And so this might be like, here's this individual's experience about this central phenomenon, or a day in the life of a ninth grade student who goes to ag mechanics and what they learned, or something along those lines. And then the theoretical approach is when we start with some type of theory and then end with the theory and use the interviews to kind of help build our case that way. But we're doing it based on an already existing perspective of participants, and we're trying to see if maybe our population also aligns with those results on that theory. And then the experimental or performance approach is going to include the report of qualitative research. You could see things in forms of poems, stories, drama, anything like an ethnography. Any of those would kind of take place in this style. So you're not really writing a standard research report. You're more capturing kind of the subject that we're working through in the interviews in a very, different format than what we would have seen with the very rigid structure of the quantitative protocols. And so I always like to tell students, whether you were headed on a quantitative structure or a qualitative structure, we need to realize that writing is not this just I get on the bus and I drive, right? I get in my car and I go. I put paper in front of me and I write. It's a much more complicated process where you're going to have days that are really good. You're going to have days where you're like, I'm losing my mind. And you're going to have days where you get stuck on stuff or you're not sure how to get started. And all of that is a very normal process as you're moving through this, from start to finish in the thesis or the project experience. So don't let that overwhelm you or stop you from being productive in these spaces. Just know that's pretty normal, that it's going to feel a little bumpy and a little messy, and you're going to be learning as you work through this. It's not going to be just straightforward. I sat down, I wrote 12 chapters of my thesis, and I moved on with my life. So there are 6 big things we want to pay attention to as we're beginning our writing process and thinking through how we want to relay information in our program. And we want to make sure that we can, use inclusive language, we can apply this research to multiple groups or individuals, and that we're not allowing any of our bias to come to the table as we're starting to write. We want to make sure as we move into scholarly terms that we understand what specific terms we're using to convey ideas, especially if we're in theoretical framework. We want to make sure that we're applying quantitative and qualitative terms appropriately, right? Especially when we get to things like statistical analysis, it's really easy to not be super clear on some of those terms. And then to really make sure we're being consistent. So we might need to, have a dictionary or really define some terms in this writing process. And then just making sure that our results are ethical. It's one of the huge things is that we don't want to continue to participate in that, belief that researchers are not, choosing honest data, but that we're skewing it. And so those are the first kind of big three. And then again, as we move into, appropriate points of view, making sure that we understand, are we doing, more passive style writing, which is we often see in quantitative where I don't refer to the researcher at all. Are we doing more constructive writing like we see in qualitative projects where we are referring to the researcher and their thoughts on things? And then making sure that we balance research and content. We really want that to be about a 50-50 balance between we want to give you information about research, but also give you information about the subject matter. And so when we tend to overemphasize methods versus the actual data, if we're trying to really defend ourselves, especially in, thesis settings, it might underemphasize, what we actually are doing on the research project. And so we really want to have that balanced. There's a great example from the book that shows you a poor model and a better model when it comes to that balancing. And then last but not least, we just want to make sure that we interconnect sections so that the flow of the research writing makes sense from section to section or chapter to chapter. And we're not just, providing super chunky information to the reader. That's no fun to read. And the last two things that we really want to go through are understanding how to write an abstract. So just making sure we understand that we need to take all of this amazing research information that we have discovered and boil it down to a paragraph. And so you've got the four big things that you need to hit within that abstract, and you're going to see abstracts required often for conference proceedings, for your actual thesis, and often as well as journals. And then last but not least, really building a concise title, and you're going to see kind of what we would prefer to have in quantitative and qualitative projects on the screen here. So just really focusing that we're not just building this really verbose long thing that nobody really understands, but that it's short, it's condensed, and it really shows what this topic is about. All right, let's get this lecture finished up. So when we evaluate the quality of research, there are a lot of amazing resources in the textbook. So I would highly recommend that for quantitative standards, you go and look at figure 9.7 and 9.2. They're going to talk you through some things we should think about when we're approaching different sections within a writing on a quantitative side. And then I love it because there's three frameworks, and I'm going to show them to you here on the slide for the qualitative. But what I love is that it goes through Lincoln's, Creswell and Potts, and Richardson's, and it's different criteria that we have for evaluating qualitative research. And the reason this is important is that it can really vary when we examine this style of research because there's just so much interpretation and interviewing, and there's some creative things that you can see in this style. And so we want to make sure that we kind of pick a good framework for evaluating the quality of that based off of the evaluation criteria we're looking at. And so we might, focus a lot more on rigorous data collection. Are we looking at multiple instruments? Or we might, really focus on analysis, and we want to see, what are the levels of analysis and how did you go after that? Or, we may move more to what is the knowledge that we have or the reality, those experiences that the participants are sharing with us. And so it's a little bit harder to evaluate qualitative because it is such a more explorative, flexible style. So that's the only thing I want to leave you with is let's just make sure that you guys are feeling comfortable with those quantitative and qualitative standards. And those are really great places to refer to as you get into your own writing and you're trying to think of, okay, is this going to be helpful? Is this quality of research going to make a difference for me? Am I adding to something useful in my program? Am I advancing policy discussions? Am I adding to the knowledge base on this specific topic? And that's how you know you've done a project that's going to impact Plus, then you've followed through with those evaluation criteria saying, yes, I've looked through this, standard of quality for quantitative research and I feel that I've met that, or qualitative. And as long as you can kind of take your writing and push it up against one of those criteria and your facility or your faculty, you're feeling good about it, you are good to go on a writing side. So, ladies and gents, that's all I got for you on the writing of research materials. I hope you have a wonderful week.